Hey everybody. Last Sunday was the record fair here in town. I think it's twice a year they have it, and I hadn't saved up a whole lot of money this time. I try to save up at least $100, but I ended up spending some of the money I'd set aside, and I try not to tap into just my regular checking account money for stuff like this. I just try to save up the spare change, things like that, and just whatever. I just have a small budget. So I'd saved up about $80, and it just so happened, if you watch one of my other videos, the day before I went to a store, and they have a pretty good selection of used vinyl stuff for like $1 or $3 a piece. So I'd spent between that and a couple Frank Zappa CDs. I'd spent about 35 bucks. It's really tapped into my budget, and what I ended up with is $48 to go to the record fair. Well, if you've been to a record fair, you know that can go real quick if you're buying some collectible stuff, records for 10, 12, 15, 20 bucks a piece. So I knew ahead of time I'd have to kind of go in with the strategy of digging through the dollar bins or the bargain bins of the record fair. So I thought that'd be kind of interesting to see what I could find. So anyway, I get there and kind of walk in and survey the place. And I noticed it doesn't seem like there were quite as many tables this time or vendors. But I went up to kind of straight through the door of the first booth or first table. Guy had a lot of CDs, kind of interesting. Looking a lot of jazz CDs. Reasonable prices. $5-6. Stuff on impulse, things like that. And on the bottom, on the floor, he had a box that had some kind of more interesting stuff. Some kind of like the little paper sleeve booklet CDs or little cardboard sleeve CDs. But I remember there was one that was like, I know it had Hamid Drake on drums, great drummer out of Chicago. I want to say Joe Morris was on it, and William Parker, the bassist. And I think it was $3, and I thought, okay, I don't want to jump the gun and buy it, but I kept it in mind. And there were a few other things kind of like that, some interesting jazz type stuff. Not your typical, not impulse kind of major label stuff, but kind of the more recent out there jazz. So I thought I'd come back and check on that, if I had any money left over. And then the next booth, the very next booth I go to, the guy had a bunch of, I keep saying booth, it's tables, they're not booths. Next table, the guy had some boxes set up, and they were, I'm kind of looking over, and he said, okay, these are all, these records are $2 a piece, and if you buy 6, it's $10, 6 for $10. So I thought, well, that's a pretty good deal. That's about my price range. And start looking through, and sure enough, one of the first records I find is a Cannonball Adderley record. This one's called 74 Miles Away, Walk Tall. Those are two of the tracks on the album, and this one's on Capitol. It's Cannonball with his brother Nat on cornet, Joe Zawinul on piano. Good Lord, I can't find the other musicians. This is what drives me nuts about some of these record labels. Unlike Blue Note, where they list the musicians clearly, they kind of stick it in this fancy liner note, story thing. This is Leonard Feather wrote this. Good writer, but you have to read through the whole thing to find out who's in the band. But anyway, this is one of the first I found. So for 6 for $10, that's less than $2 a piece. I was like, all right, I'll take this one. I kept digging. And this one actually, it's really good. It's a live recording, and that title track, 74 Miles Away, it's got a real spiritual vibe to it, and some really cool soloing on it. And then the last track is called Oh Babe, and Cannonball's brother Nat actually takes vocals on that. It's kind of like an R&B tune. Really cool stuff. I always think of Cannonball Adderley in my mind. I always think kind of like not boring or mainstream, but just not out there. And some of the stuff on this record is kind of out there, so I was pretty happy to listen to that one. Now I found this one. It's beat up. Obviously had some water damage, but it's a Modern Jazz Quartet, Patterns on United Artists. Not really a label I associate with them normally. Haven't really given this one a listen yet, but it's stereo. Still in the original, you know, these little half-round plastic inner sleeves, and just in beautiful, beautiful shape. Looks like it's hardly been played. It's been slipped in and out of the plastic a few times, and got some very, very light scuffing on it, but this looks beautiful. So I'm excited to listen to that. I like the Modern Jazz Quartet. Milt Jackson on the vibes. John Lewis on piano. Can't remember who else is in there. Connie Kay on drums. Percy Heath on bass. So I was excited finding some cool jazz. Kept digging through. Found this one on a little 10-inch here on Brunswick. This is called Jazz on the Air, Volume 1. And of course, on the air, it's recorded off the radio. These are radio broadcasts from 1953. The Terry Gibbs Sextet and the Milt Buckner Trio. Terry Gibbs played the vibes, and let's see who else was in his band. Don Elliott on mellophone. Don't recognize any of the other musicians. And then Milt Buckner's trio. He was a Hammond organ player who kind of predated Jimmy Smith. Now Milt Buckner was kind of a short, heavy-set guy, and his, I guess, feet couldn't reach the foot pedals on the organ, so he's just playing the keys, he's not working the pedals. Yeah, so he was kind of like the predecessor to Jimmy Smith. Different sound, but you know, some early Hammond organ and jazz. And in his trio, he's got a guitar player and drums. And there's one track here where Terry Gibbs joins his trio. So you got the Milt Buckner trio plus Terry Gibbs on vibes, and there's some really cool stuff on that track. It's a really neat little record. So moving on, some Verve. I was kind of excited to find some Verve. And actually, this one's Clef. Predates Verve. This is Clef, one of Norman Granz's label before Verve. There's Clef and Norgran. And it's got David Stone Martin artwork. Not really one of my favorites there. But that's David Stone Martin. This is Count Basie Dance Session album number 2. Kind of in rough shape, but you know, for less than $2 for an old Clef, yeah, I'll go for it. You can see the label. So that was pretty cool. I like picking up Verves, Clef, Norgran, all that kind of stuff. And another Verve, this one, Dizzy Gillespie. Half Trumpet Will Excite. And there's another one of those ones where you can't, doesn't really list the musicians very clearly on the back. I don't have my glasses on, so don't think I can really see who's on there. So this is kind of an early Verve. It's no mention of MGM on the label. Verve hadn't been sold to MGM by this point. And let's see. I got one more Verve I picked up out of the stock. This one is, got a sleeve here. Bud Powell. It's got some damage on the front, but still in pretty good shape. Bud Powell 57. And this is actually a reissue of some stuff that I think was on the Clef or Norgran label on a 10-inch, I think. And they reissued it on LP. And what's odd is the recording, I think the original 10-inch was from like 54 or something. I don't know if this was released in 57. I would kind of assume. I mean, that would make sense, but Discogs has this listed at like 54 or something, so I don't know. But anyway, some old Bud Powell here with Percy Heath on bass, Max Roach drums, or Art Blakey on drums on some of the other tracks. That was really cool. And this one it looks like a later issue, a repress, because you can see on the label it's makes mention it's MGM. You see MGM Records, a division of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer down at the bottom. So probably not an original pressing of this one. So that was cool. I like the old Verves, Norgrans, Clefs, things like that, Norman Granz's early labels. Another label I like to collect is Pacific Jazz. West Coast label out of LA. This is Jerry Mulligan California Concerts. And I didn't think about this when I picked it up. It's just featuring Zoot Sims and Bob Brookmeyer. I've actually got this record already, but it's got a different cover art. And a different catalog number. This is PJ50. And I want to say that one is like PJ120 something. But it's got like a black cover with kind of like gold, gold text on it. It's kind of, I think it's got like this picture cropped in or something, zoomed in. So this is probably an earlier issue, I'm assuming, with that catalog number PJ50. I don't know. On the World Pacific, got a World Pacific label here. So that's kind of weird, but I mean, for less than $2, I don't mind having a second copy, and it's a good record. So next up, another label that's kind of interesting to collect. Another West Coast label. This one, Bethlehem. This is the Australian Jazz Quartet. There's a bunch of kangaroos there in the cover. Yeah, these guys are from Australia, I assume. I don't really know any of these musicians, but I pick up anything pretty much I see on Bethlehem. It's in decent shape. Pretty reliable label. Got some interesting stuff on it. This one's a little beat up, a little scuffed up, but that's okay. It's a label you I don't really see that often. I see it around, but not super often. And then some old Atlantics. This one, Shorty Rogers. This one called Martians Come Back. Shorty Rogers and His Giants. And you've actually got a lot of big West Coast names here. Conte Candoli, Pete Candoli, Don Fagerquist, Jimmy Geoffrey, Bud Shank, Barney Kessel, Lou Levy, Leroy Vinegar, Shelly Manne, the drummer. I've actually got another copy of this. I bought a copy of this a while ago, but this one's in really good shape. And does some interesting stuff. It's on an early Atlantic label here. So that was kind of cool. I'll have to take a look at the copy I have to see what shape it's in. I might just pass this along to someone else. And also on the Atlantic label, Dave Pell, the Dave Pell Octet. Pell was a sax player, tenor sax. And again, he's got some of the big West Coast names. Don Fagerquist on trumpet, Andre Previn, piano, Claude Williamson, piano. Yeah, another old Atlantic. I think this one's on a later label. No, same black and white, or black and silver label. That's cool. I like these old Atlantics. And then, of course, some Brubeck, some old Brubeck. Can't pass those up. This one in Columbia, Dave Brubeck at Storyville, 1954. This one has got Joe Dodge on drums, Ron Crotty or Bob Bates on bass. And I think some of this stuff was recorded live, some of it not. Can't remember what the deal is. Haven't cleaned this one up yet to give it a good listen. But that's a Columbia 6i mono. Another one from my Brubeck collection. Managed to, over the course of the past year, build a pretty big Dave Brubeck collection. Pretty amazing. Never thought I would have bought all this Dave Brubeck, but just keep finding it. And then some old RCA Victor. I don't really think of RCA Victor as having kind of cutting edge jazz stuff necessarily, but this is some pretty cool stuff. It's stereo Dynagroove pressing, the Gary Burton Quartet, called Duster. So you got Gary Burton on vibes, Larry Coryell on guitar, Roy Haynes on drums, and Steve Swallow on bass. I believe. And this one's really clean pressing on this, and just a great record. I've heard this before, had a digital copy from online, but I'm glad to have this on vinyl. Some great interplay between the vibes and the guitar. It's weird, at times it almost reminds me of kind of the interplay between the keyboards and guitar on Yes's Relayer, kind of the Patrick Moraz, Steve Howe thing. Especially the guitar playing, I don't know what it is. But it's a really good record. Not really what I'd expect out of RCA Victor. It's kind of not straight ahead jazz. And then a couple I found that I was pretty excited to find, because I've had an old Columbia record by this artist, and I found two more from the same time period, so these are nice. This is John Handy, the John Handy Quintet. This is the second John Handy album. So you got John Handy in alto and tenor sax, you got guitar, violin, bass, and drums. I don't really recognize most of the other musicians, but nice Columbia. This one, another one that's still in the original plastic inner here. Real nice Stereo 360 label on this. This one's in beautiful shape. I've actually got another, like I said, I've got another John Handy. I had one on Columbia that's really nice, really good. And a couple on Impulse. One's pretty good, one not quite so good. And then the other John Handy is recorded live at the Monterey Jazz Festival. Produced by John Hammond. He was the big jazz guy, at least early on at Columbia Records. Big champion of jazz, and this looks like a later issue, obviously, on the CBS label. But yeah, this one looks like it's basically unplayed, pretty much mint. So that's cool. I really like his playing. I bought the first record I had by him. I bought it at the Friends of the Library sale and just forgotten about it, and just kind of put it on my shelf and hadn't listened to it for like probably a year and a half. Pulled it out and played it, and I was like, wow, this guy's really good. I just thought he'd probably be like some kind of straight ahead conventional jazz, but I mean, a really excellent player. This one was in the mix, and I just it didn't hit me at first, like, how early this is for the label. This is an ECM, Paul Bley, and with Gary Peacock. So you got Paul Bley on piano, Gary Peacock on bass, Paul Motion or Billy Elgart on drums. This is ECM 1003, so I believe that's the third album put out by ECM. There you go, Paul Bley. Yeah, this one, it's German press, really good shape, really nice shape. The original inner sleeve, just in beautiful shape. Excellent music. I've got some ECM, but I don't think I've got anything else this early. This is from like 1970, I want to say. 1971, 1970. I was pretty excited to find this. This is in the 6 for $10 bin, so less than $2 on that one. A little bit of delamination on the plastic on the back, but no big deal. And then I had to round out kind of the 6 for 10 deal. I'd found like 10 records, and I needed to find 2 more, so I kind of picked out a couple that were just kind of wild cards. They looked interesting, but they weren't like, I don't know, they weren't like the kind of jazz I normally look for. But this one looked interesting, and it's actually really good. This one is called Lays of Jazz, and it's the jazz sounds of Arthur Lyman. And so I guess he was a guy who was born in Hawaii, grew up in Hawaii, I think, from what I read. He plays the vibes. This one was recorded in Hawaii at the Aluminum Dome of Henry J. Kaiser's famed Hawaiian Village Hotel. Interesting stuff. You got Arthur Lyman on vibes, marimba, congas, Alan Soares on piano and celeste, John Kramer on bass and percussions, and Harold Chang, who plays as dazzling and overwhelming an array of percussions as you'll ever see or hear. So pretty interesting. There's a picture of the aluminum dome. I guess that's kind of a concert hall at the hotel. And this is on the Hi-Fi Record label. Got a really cool looking label on this one. Neat graphic design on that. I don't think I'd heard any Arthur Lyman before, but really kind of sophisticated, sort of exotic jazz. This one's really good. And then the other kind of wild card, I'd seen this one before, and obviously you can tell from the cover kind of what the deal is, but it's Santo and Johnny. This is Encore, I guess, on the Canadian American label. And it looks like you got some electric guitar and slide guitar here, or not slide, steel guitar, tabletop guitar, a Fender. I don't think I've ever listened to these guys, but it looks really interesting. Looks very interesting. Ooh, this one's pretty beat up, but we'll see. So yeah, it was basically free. I mean, they were $2 a piece, and your 6 was basically free, or if you do the math, it's 6 for $10, or whatever that works out to be. Oh, and there's one more. I guess one of those I had to pick one more, I guess. And so this one is the one that's not jazz. Most of these are pretty much all jazz. But I picked up a Sugar Hill Records compilation Greatest Rap Hits. Just some cool classic very early hip-hop tracks off the Sugar Hill label. So you've got Spoonie G's Spoonin' Rap, Lady B, To the Beat Y'all, Funky 4+1, Rappin' and Rockin' the House, Sequence, Funk You Up, Super Wolf Can Do It, and of course Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. I like to collect these old Sugar Hill records, especially the 12-inch singles, because their house band, not the band that played on Rapper's Delight, that was a band called Positive Force. But when they heard that song on the radio, there were some musicians that recorded with Sylvia Robinson and her husband, who ran the label. When they heard that song, Rapper's Delight, they recognized it was one of her songs, one of her productions, and they came back to the label to work for him. And that was Doug Wimbish, bass player, Keith LeBlanc, a drummer, and Skip McDonald, a guitar player. And so they were the house band at Sugar Hill Records and played on a lot of those classic hip-hop tracks. And then they got tired of the BS, the shady business dealings, and went to Tommy Boy Records and then over to England for On You Sound Records, and hooked up with Adrian Sherwood, the English kind of dub experimental producer over there, who became Tackhead, or Fats Comet. But anyway, stopped at another booth kind of across from that first one, and guy didn't have a whole lot of interesting stuff, but he had some like $2 bins, and managed to find a jazz album, Ahmad Jamal, Chamber Music of the New Jazz. And this one's interesting. It's on the Argo label, and I've got some of this stuff on Argo and even Epic. And I've seen this record before, like pictures of it online. It's got a completely different cover. Kind of weird. Took me a while looking around Discogs to even find a listing for this one with this cover. But on the Argo label, division of Chess Records. That's kind of cool. And finally, the last booth I stopped at, the guy had, I guess they were $2 records again. So I picked up a few. Nice Dave Brubeck. Dave Brubeck Time In on Columbia. I think this one's super special. It's just a mono Mono 2i or whatever. And this one's kind of interesting. Firehouse 5 plus 2. This is a group of guys. Some of them worked for Walt Disney Studios back in the early days. And one of the guys that worked in Walt Disney Studio, I think, and then left, was a guy named Walt Kelly, who was the artist behind Pogo, if you know Pogo. And who else? Ward Kimball. Can't remember the other guy from the Disney Studios, but they were kind of guys who worked in the Disney Studios, animators or musicians or whatever. And at night they'd kind of jam out, or even like on break at work, they'd jam out as this kind of old New Orleans style throwback jazz band, Firehouse 5 plus 2. So I've kind of been collecting those for the Disney collection, but they're kind of interesting as well from a jazz perspective. And kind of a neat label. I think this is actually a subsidiary of Contemporary Records out of LA. It's got kind of ugly demonstration copy, not for sale stamp on the label there. Kind of ruins the artwork, but that's alright. So that was an interesting find. And then finally the last thing I bought was I kind of collect stuff by this guy's guitarist Al Caiola. Kind of grew up on the jazz scene, then got into kind of the early rock and roll sound. Became like a session player in the early rock and roll stuff. This one, Tough Guitar, kind of gets into the rock and roll sound on this one. There's a picture of Al, looking like a tough guy. So you've got Hound Dog, A Hard Day's Night, the Beatles song, We're Gonna Rock Around the Clock, Tequila, Big Noise from Winnetka. Yeah, some interesting tracks. This one on United Artists, who's under contract with United Artists, put a whole bunch of records out on that label. This is actually probably one of the better records that he put out. He had some kind of sappy stuff he put out as well, but this is more kind of got the twangy sound to it, which I like. And that was pretty much it. I ended up spending all my money on records. I never went back to the CD booth, CD table. Just decided to go all vinyl. And I was pretty happy with my haul. I had 48 bucks and came home with a whole bunch of records, some really neat jazz stuff. So yeah, that's it. I was pretty happy. So thanks for watching. I'll see you again in the next video. Bye guys.